Okay, and then Laura, I see, are you still out here, Laura, or are you back east? Juan, morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
I am here and I'm going to connect.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm back in Maryland.
Oh, you're back. Okay. I talked to my friend there in Hagerstown, Jack Newkirk, the other day. So
Oh, did you?
yeah. So the weather's been kind of up and down there.
It is up and down. We had lots of snow, like Dorothy said, last Sabbath.
Yeah.
And now it's warm. It's so warm today. It's almost too hot to be outside. It might be 68 degrees.
Anyway, well, good. Okay. Yeah, Juan, could you just move out of the screen so we can see Carmen by herself? We don't have to see you.
Okay.
I saw your son the other day.
Did he did a good job?
Well, actually, it was his hygienist that did the job. So she did a good job.
Okay.
But I did have to give him the money. So.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody.
Yeah, I've got us on recording, David.
Okay, and I think we're on Facebook. So here we go. Revelation chapter 14, beginning with verse 6 in the King James Version. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that have made heaven and earth and the sea and the foundations of the waters. And there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever. And they have no rest, day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. So let's pray. Dear God, we know these verses have been understood by many people in different ways, beginning with the one who wrote them. Over the centuries, people have found hope and fear and uncertainty in these verses. They have come to mean the purpose of our movement. We wouldn't be Adventists were it not for these three verses, and yet in our own community, there are different understandings of them, just as there have been over the centuries. We are aware that some of these differences in our own community of faith cause some tension and some discord and some disappointment. We are thankful that Carsten is with us today to give us a more positive look at all these things. In Christ's name, amen. Well, we are glad to have Carsten Thomsen all the way from Denmark, where it is 8 hours earlier than we are. So that I'm not sure what time that makes it, but in any case, Carsten is an engineer who was born in in Denmark. As I heard it earlier, moved to Michigan, and for back to Denmark, but let's get in a few more details. Carsten, welcome.
Just
Again.
before you do that, David, would you make Monty the co-host, or would?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Wait a minute. And okay.
There you go. You got it.
Okay, 1 second here. Okay, I think everybody is a co-host who should be a co-host.
I think you're right. You're right.
Okay, Carsten, where are you?
I'm sitting in my living room, and we're 8 hours ahead of you guys in California. So the sun just set here 20 minutes ago.
My, there you are. We see you in a much clearer way now. Are you having any continuing problems with COVID? For a long time, we heard things were on the decline, and then we heard things were on the incline. Where are they now?
Well, as of February 1st, the Danish government said COVID is no longer an issue, and we hardly talked about it since then.
Okay.
So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So that's why I took this trip to among others, visit you in California here a few weeks ago. This is my celebrate get out of COVID prison trip.
Now, we had a meal together in Loma Linda on your tour, but where did your tour begin and where did it end?
Well, I started in Las Vegas, of all places. And then I went to see some family in Loma Linda. Then I headed out east across the desert. Decided to go north, visit my parents' old home in Cottonwood, Arizona, and visited the church there on Sabbath. And then headed up to the Grand Canyon and then east to Santa Fe. And that's a wonderful city. I've never been there before. And then down to White Sands.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And hoping to get some sunshine and lay at the pool in Tucson, and it rained all day.
Oh my.
So then I went back to California and then up to San Francisco to visit a brother up there also.
Okay. Did you fly home from San Francisco?
Right, yeah.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your career. You're an engineer. That's a rather rare profession amongst Adventists. It shouldn't be, but there aren't as many Adventist engineers as there are doctors and nurses and teachers and so forth. How about get into engineering, and where did it take you?
Well, I'm actually, not a formal engineer. I'm an engineer by dumb luck. I took math and physics at Andrews, but then I got so messed up in electronics, and my interest in that just grew through the years. So I built the radio station at Andrews, WAUS, and hung around a couple of years before I went back to Denmark and got a job in a major engineering company there, and spent 20 years there and had a lot of fun working with technology, test and measurement instrumentation. So then I moved to Austin, Texas for 7 years, worked at a high-tech company there, and then back to Denmark for the next 20 years. So I'm sort of schizophrenic, and I'm a dual citizen, both of Denmark and the US.
Well, that's good. That's not bad. That's good. Go ahead.
Being an engineer is a privilege in some respects, because all my jobs after I left Andrews have been outside denominational employment. And that gives you a different perspective on the world and on the church. And sometimes the way we communicate to people who are not Adventist, or people who are fed up and tired with it, it's vastly different when you look at it from the inside out versus the outside in. Often when we talk in the church board about people leaving the church, I often say, well, isn't it the church that is leaving the people?
Oh my, many of us feel that with increasing intensity, particularly over the last few years. Now, you have two brothers who live in the United States, and they both have worked for the church, correct?
Right. I have a brother in Loma Linda and another up in Sonora, California.
One's been a professor and one's been a pastor.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm pausing here just for a moment because I think an important part of your life is that you're a widower.
Yeah, that happened 7 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
where my wife got hit with the very negative, triple negative breast cancer, as they call it, which is one of the most aggressive ones. So in the course of 1 year, she went from being a vivacious young lady of 65 years old to saying goodbye on Christmas Eve.
Oh my. Oh my. Well, it's hard to imagine what that must be like. We're pleased though that you've carried on, not only professionally but also personally. The occasion for our discussion really isn't this particular article, though I like it very much, but it was what you said about ideas being good they can be good without necessarily being true. And I was very much intrigued by that. And I therefore looked up what else I could find about you on the internet. And then I found this article, and I found it so pleasing that I have asked you to do this. I'm going to ask you just to read it as it is, and then we will discuss it. I'll see if I can bring it up on the share screen. I think I can.
Yeah, I can bring it up. I made a slide with just the 10 points without the prose with it. Okay,
then perhaps you can repeat the first 2 or 3 paragraphs extemporaneously, because I thought those were very important paragraphs.
Right, I'll be glad to read it, but if I share my screen, you might be able to see if I can figure out how to do this.
Okay.
Keynote, there it's called, the Roy Branson Sabbath School. Share. Can you guys see that?
Yes, beautifully.
Good. And you can also see me. That's not necessary.
Yes. You have a beautiful background behind you, sky, sea.
Yep. All right. Well, let me start with the article. And, it was written right after the fall meetings of the Autumn Council. I think they call it the annual meeting now. And it was written there in October 17, I think. I just finished listening to Elder Ted Wilson's annual council Sabbath sermon in its entirety. As I remember, it was an hour and a half long. What an oratorical masterpiece. Speaking with great confidence and great conviction, leaving nothing open to discussion, with all the pieces of Seventh-day Adventist doctrine, Adventist identity, and Adventist purpose clearly enunciated. It took me back to the year 1960, when the evangelist Fortis Dedamore crusaded for 3 weeks in the Battle Creek Tabernacle and persuaded me to baptize. Things were so simple, so clear when I was 11 years old. The truth was the truth, and it wasn't a matter of faith. It was a matter of the truth being so firmly founded that it was facts in my young mind. There's no doubt in my mind that a clear message like Wilson's, spoken with great conviction, is reassuring to members who long for certainty. There's a significant group of people that needs to entrust their systems of belief to the hands of the confident, inspired priests of the church. And realistically, it might well enrich their lives, assuming that it does not lead them to extremism. But when I listened to the Autumn Council meetings, I wasn't seduced that time. Now, many years after I was baptized by Elder Dedamore, I received Elder Wilson's speech as a masterpiece of, I hate to say it, manipulation and circular reasoning. because he presented all Seventh-day Adventist truths as irrefutable, God-given facts. And when you turn faith into facts, as I mentioned, it actually diminishes faith in God. And it replaces it with a blind acceptance, a gripping, but an oversimplistic message. A message where theology is trumped, or theology trumps science. And that has nothing to do with the former president. It also became very clear to me that this is not the kind of Seventh-day Adventist I now am or want to be. I used to be that way, but I'm no longer anymore. I'm 72 now. Life has taught me a lot of things.
Lost your sound.
Yes, and I did that. Hang on, everybody. I tried to, can you unmute yourselves? Can you hear
Now
me?
you should be able to hear me.
And
Can you hear me now?
No.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear now.
Okay.
Okay. I can hear you. How long have I been out of commission?
You were just saying. You were just saying that certainty may help some people, but it doesn't help others. Maybe you could back up to about that point. I apologize. I heard something. I tried to mute it, and then by mistake, I muted everybody.
Yeah, I knew I'd get censored.
Now I'm not hearing you again.
That certainty is something that can be of value to some people, as long as it does not lead them to extremism. I perceived Ella Wilson's speech as a masterpiece of manipulation and circular reasoning. I hate to say it, but that's the way it hit me. Because he presented all the Seventh Adventist truths as irrefutable, God-given facts. And that actually diminishes our faith in God when we replace faith with what we consider facts. If we replace it with a blind acceptance of a gripping, but an oversimplistic message, a message where theology trumps science. It also became clear to me at that time that that is not the type of Seventh-day Adventist I now am or want to be. When I look back over the many lay sermons I've preached and Sabbath school discussions I've led through the years, I've gently tried to share my search for a bigger, more gracious God and a more gracious church. And I must pronounce myself guilty of not being in compliance with either the beliefs or the attitudes enunciated at this year's annual council. On top of that, the Danish Union of Adventists is also under the official censure of the General Conference, which occurred 2 or 3 years ago. And that censure has not been removed, but I think it's been forgotten. So what kind of Seventh-day Adventist do I want to be? I was extremely upset when I heard those sermons. I mean, it was a picture of God that was vindictive. It was a picture of the church that was clinging desperately to things that it felt it was under attack. It was not the positive message of Christ that I felt there. And my impulsive reaction was, I don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. I remember I woke at 3 a.m. one night, and the thought struck me, Carsten, don't let the dark thoughts win over the light. And I decided to say, or to write down for myself, what I saw as the positive things in Christianity and in Seventh-day Adventism. And this is the 10 points that I have on the screen here, and they actually mirror Mark Finley's sermon where he talked about 10 theological issues facing the church. And this is my reaction to those, where what I felt was very, very great negativism, that we were abandoning the Bible, we were abandoning Adventist identity, we were abandoning our belief in the prophecies and the literal creation and so on. I just couldn't live with that anymore. So I tried to turn it around and out of the negative energy, be positive. So the 10 aspects of Adventist theology that I celebrate is, number one, the life-giving Bible. I believe that the Bible is the inspired story of man's relationship to God and man's view of the divine through the ages. So the Bible is conditioned by the language of man at the time it was written, by the pictures and the metaphors that they used at that time, as man struggled with his primitive language to describe the ultimately complex and powerful God. A lot of the Old Testament is really hard to swallow for me if I read it as a prescriptive Old Testament. I can easily find things of an angry, vindictive God who regrets the people that he created and wants to drown them all in the flood and destroy them in Sodom and Gomorrah, and on and on and on. But nowadays, I read it as a story of people who believe that they were God's people and how they interpreted God, not necessarily how God really was. That maybe is a wrong exegesis, but I prefer to read it that way, as a very important history of the evolution of the understanding of the divine. And I call the Bible a life-giving book because it reveals through Christ an almighty and loving God, and I think that must permeate all of our readings of the scriptures. For me, I read the Bible today through the eyes of Christ. And I don't think Christ was a theologian. I think he was a believer in what I call functional religion. He got a lot of theological trick questions. Trick question back to them. But the life of Christ was oriented toward how does your belief affect your behavior to your neighbor, your family, your children, and to your God. And that's what I call. Number two, I believe in a dynamic Adventist identity. When I look at the history of Adventism, as you mentioned, David, that's the mistake by Hiram Edson, as I called it, of reinterpreting the 1844 misunderstanding and then saying that it should be interpreted as a heavenly action there. It may well have been wrong, but it helped them to recover from their stumbles and move on. It showed a dynamic search for something better that characterized the early Adventist church for many decades. I believe that the Adventist church arose as a protest against the stagnation of mainstream churches. I think it was fantastic that the founders got thrown out of the Methodist church. It was a time of a movement that mobilized believers with new faith and fervor, that they recognized that they had stumbled in their understanding of Scripture, that they showed a vitality and an evolution of their faith. The church, I think, in many respects was a leader in its unique focus on the whole man, the mental, physical, spiritual, intellectual, relationship aspects of mankind. It had a focus and still has a focus on God's will for salvation of all people and a hope for a better life, not only now, but also beyond. And the Adventist church, I think as George Tichy in his book very wisely wrote, inspired a fantastic dynamic worldwide movement. It was a church that was action-oriented. It was a church that was dynamic and changing. The third point I have on my list is the Grand Prophecies. I believe that God gave prophecies for all time, valid for all time. He painted grand pictures, pictures of the mystery and power of the divine. And that's why they're often so colorful and so mystical. And these pictures and metaphors, they find great relevance and deep spiritual meaning for every generation and culture. I don't think they're restricted to a Jewish world or to a Christian world or to an American-centric world. I don't believe that God gives prophecies for only this part of the world. When we see the prophecies, the theme is simple, an ultimate victory of love over evil, first of all in our own hearts, and ultimately also cosmically. That is a red thread binding all prophecies together. And I think we've all been disappointed at narrow time, year, and date prophecies and predictions that haven't worked out. It's time to look at the spiritual message and the practical message in the prophecies instead. The fourth thing that I really celebrate is the miracle of creation. As an engineer, we're sort of very fact-oriented. We build things, we test things, we make sure that they work. And when I was young, I thought that God just snapped his finger and then it happened. And as I get older and I study more technology and science, and recently read a book on CRISPR, the gene splicing technologies, and there it turns out that man actually works together with native RNA and DNA mechanisms that duplicate RNA and DNA, that remove errors in them, that actually perform splicing, that God has defined a system where RNA strings can splice themselves. For me, as my little engineering mind, which gets a bit smaller and smaller by the day, I stand humbled and in awe of this. I don't understand it. It's just too fantastic. And it makes me also feel a joy and a responsibility of being a co-creator with God. I mean, isn't it amazing that we can have children starting just as two cells that unite, and the cells divide and find their own division of labors and become fingernails and toenails and ears and heart and lungs and kidneys and a new set of reproductive organs. It's mind-blowing for me. And it makes me humble. And I'm very proud of being humble, of course, right? No, but seriously, it imbues in me a great humility for the greatness of God. And with that creation, of course, a 7-day cycle. It's a beautiful cycle. It's a cycle of rest and celebration, and has a special gift of deep importance to all mankind, that wonderful cycle. The fifth item on my list is a Jesus of love. It's also Jesus who helps me understand the rest of the Bible. I believe that all moral viewpoints must be derived from love. And I believe that Jesus, he drew a line in the sand and asked us to lift our eyes and not look at all the rules and regulations in the Old Testament, but look at what are the underlying principles that God has given to us in our relationship to him and to our fellow man. And, you know, Jesus had a lot of problems with the theologians, because anytime they started nitpicking about, well, if you've been married 7 times, who are you going to be married with in heaven? And when you walk through a field, are you allowed to pick the grain and so on? He just shook his head, and I think he said, haven't you understood what it's all about? There's a higher level of principles that's very simple. Love your God and your fellow man. And I'm a deep believer in our God-given conscience and intellect. God created our intellect. God created our conscience. And I think he trusts us to apply the principles of love in all aspects of our lives. So we don't have to worry about, does this rule or that rule here apply, which would make us the slaves of the law that Paul talks about. And that view of the Bible, that view of the divine, for me, and many I've talked to it about in that perspective, has been a huge relief and removed the burdens of not being good enough and feeling guilty about not following the rules and feeling entrusted by the Creator to follow the principles of love. So that is a very central thing, and I think for many of us in our beliefs. Then comes the truth. And here we come into the things that have come on the agenda in the more recent years, the complexities of sexuality. And having grown up in a totally different environment where sexuality was very binary and where homosexuality was just sinful and terrible and so on. And I was imbued with an inherent aversion to people who had different sexuality than my own. And wow, that's been a struggle to clear that out of my soul. But then I look at Jesus when the woman taken in idolatry or in, what do you call it, adultery, he says, I don't condemn you. And when I looked at my attitude as a younger person about people of different sexuality, complex as it were, for me to root out that inherent condemnation and discomfort with those type of things has been a very, very difficult thing. For us to love those that are different than ourselves, that's the hardest part. It's easy to preach to the choir. It's easy to get along well with those that are like we are. But that's crossing a real line that is a challenge in our Christianity. Those who don't understand. I had to overcome the challenge of the innate revulsion and condemnation that I felt. And in Christ's example, remember that all humans are our siblings, created and loved by the same God. So that was a tough pill for me to swallow. And it's also a tough pill for me to swallow people in the polarized society that we have today, people who vote for Trump. I just can't dismiss them. It's a large percentage of our Adventist church members that support him. And I forced myself to read and listen to a lot of the stuff that he says to try to understand them. I think I have a responsibility to do that, to just sit in my own bubble like you guys here on this Zoom Sabbath School or Adventist Today or Spectrum and so on. That's not challenging. God challenges us. Number 7, the advent of joy and hope. I believe that in the advent of Jesus, he pointed to a second coming, which would make all things new. As an 11-year-old, I didn't think I would grow up, get married, and have children before Jesus came again. It didn't work out that way. Is it a false promise? Did Jesus lie to us? What's going on? We don't preach the second coming very often. And I've taken the liberty to reinterpret it and let the promise of the second coming have multiple applications. For me, when I got swept off by my feet by the revolutionary power of his love, it gave me an inner peace and a joy, because now I know that he carries my burdens and he relieves me from the yoke of being good enough. When I think how filled my backpack could be with burdens of inferiority and sinfulness and not living up to what I should do. And then he comes and says, I'll carry your burdens for you. Wow. Then he came. That was the second coming for me. And it gives me confidence that he already has won the great controversy, the most important place, and that is in my heart, in my soul. And then more long-term, it provides hope for a cosmic second coming sometime in the future. But I have the joy of the second coming now. And then I don't have to worry about being ready to come or ready for him to come. He'll take care of that. The eighth item has to do with the sanctuary. And there I see the sanctuary as a freedom, the freedom of the sanctuary, a symbol of freedom. It's a beautiful symbolism that points to the dramatic sacrifice of Christ, freeing us once and for all from the fear of sin and death, and giving all generations comfort in a just and loving judgment. I'm sick and tired of a God who's out there to zap us down every time we misstep. I'm sick and tired of the picture of a vindictive God. That's not the God that I see in the Bible. Number 9, the prophet of change. I believe Ellen White played a pivotal role as a guiding light in the revolutionary development of the church. In her own spiritual journey, she evolved with the church toward a deeper understanding of God's love. What she said in 1870 and what she said in 1905 are not the same. She had a spiritual journey also. And I think the church's spiritual journey, her spiritual journey, encourages me to continue to evolve and learn and be fascinated and rejoice in the wonders of our God. Ellen White's prophetic voice speaks even today, encouraging us not to stagnate in our view of God, to be flexible and creative as we move forward. Her starting a revolutionary movement along with the others in the early church was flexible, was creative. We need to follow that example today. Finally, I believe in the beauty of our diversity. I believe that God speaks to us in multiple languages, multiple cultural expressions. And the thing so cool about it, he meets us where we are. In the agrarian society, when Jesus walked on earth, he spoke about the sheep. He spoke about the fishermen. He spoke about health and sickness and mental illness. He met people where they were. His language and our language should model that. We should not go out and say, beat our chest and say, we have the truth. We should go out and heal the sick, feed the hungry, and clothe the naked. That's the functional religion that I believe in. A God who listens to us, who accepts us, and nudges us forward in love. And he expects us to reflect that love to all of mankind as we celebrate the diversity in the tent of his love. And we evolve in our own spiritual journey at different speeds. And when I look back at what I've written here, the boomerang comes back because I'm very condemning of what I heard in the autumn meetings and can be very intolerant about that. And I then look in the mirror and it says, Carsten, you're just seeing yourself 50 years ago in that mirror. So I also need to show patience and tolerance to the ones that I don't agree with. But when I compare that above list of these 10 items here that for me are very, very meaningful in my confession of faith, and then when I heard the messages at the autumn council, do I belong there? And many people said, well, Carsten, the honest thing to do is resign your church membership. You're not a loyal member. And I think a lot about that. But what is a loyal member? Is that loyal member one that participates in the evolution of the church? Or is it one who just says, yes, sir, that's the way it is? If the honest thing to do is to resign my church members, I should do that. But I sort of came in a bifurcation. When I wrote this, I wrote, I would prefer to cut my ties with the General Conference, if there's a way to do that, but keep my membership in the local church, where we have a wonderful openness and a mutual support that supports our individual journeys of faith, and those journeys are valued. I probably like to make the parallel that I'm an Adventist by culture, by instinct in many ways. A large number of my friends are Adventists. Why should I leave them? I live in Denmark. I don't agree with everything the government does there. I don't leave Denmark because of that. You guys live in America, most of you. You haven't left the country because Trump was president there. We learn to embrace diversity and grow with it in our individual journeys of faith. So that's the end of my little article.
Wow. Just a second here. Yeah, just a second. I find myself pausing because this is going on at two different levels. I think one is the deeply emotional level of waking up in one's home and discovering that it is no longer one's home. Something happened when one was asleep, and that's a deeply disturbing experience. So this is traveling at that emotionally primordial level, but then it's also continuing at the more conceptual level when we think about these various themes to which Carsten has brought our attention. So we have this matter going on conceptually, but we also have it going on emotionally. And for many of us, the question, should I stay or should I leave? Or should I try to find some way to stay and leave both? Very, very wrenching question. It's not an easy one. And I'm disappointed that our General Conference president has many times said explicitly, not implied, but said explicitly, if you don't agree with XYZ, leave. And he has said that many times. And every time he has said that, I have felt that he was putting himself in a position that wasn't appropriate. I was going to say, and maybe I'll say it, that he was taking God's name in vain, that he was violating the third commandment by telling people to do what only God should tell them to do. I hasten to add that I'm sure he's a good man. Everybody, I do not know him personally, but everybody who does speaks of his unfailing courtesy and generosity and kindliness, and also at his administrative skills so that he can put together great meetings and they run smoothly. So, but on this matter, I feel like it's our responsibility to invite people and to welcome people and not to not to exclude people, but too many people have listened to him and gone. You know, that's very painful. So I'm not sure where each of you wants to engage this conversation, whether you want to talk about your own experiences of alienation and what you do when you belong to a congregation that spiritually wounds you every time you worship there. How do you handle that? That's one level, but also we have these different themes that we can look at: the miracle of creation, the freedom of the sanctuary. I suspect this is the first time I've seen the word freedom and the word sanctuary put together that way. So there's a lot to discuss at that more conceptual level. But now let's take a 10-minute break. And if you have something, here's Bud Racine saying, I believe many feel as you, Carsten. Some leave because of a concern. The church could not be more. I don't have the rest of it here, but you can read it on your chat. Yeah, but let me say this before the break. We are the Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School. And one of the things we've inherited from Roy is a firm determination not to let anybody exclude him. He simply refused to let other people define Adventism in a way that left him out. Now, I think that was easier for him than perhaps for some of us, because he was part of the Adventist, if I can put it this way, part of the Adventist aristocracy. That is, his family has been in leadership for many, many years. And it would be even more wrenching for him to leave the community than it would be for us, because they've been so intermeshed into the leadership of the church for so many generations. But still, the church did not treat him well. The church treated him, I would say, spitefully many times, and yet he simply would not give up on the church, and he simply would not let other people define for him what Adventism is. So he would praise Carsten and said, yes, of course, that's the true Adventism, and that's the Adventism to which I'm loyal, and I'm not going to let anybody make me feel unwelcome here. That's part of his legacy that we have a responsibility to continue, I think. Having said that, I do think for a person's own spiritual benefit, in some cases, it probably would be better not to attend a particular congregation, but perhaps join a large church like this one, Loma Linda, or Pioneer Memorial Church at Andrews, or Sligo Church, and worship there in distance, rather than being bludgeoned week by week with spiritually damaging material. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break, and then we will come back, and be sure to let Forrest know if you would like to speak. I am sure that you have lots to say. Thank you, Carsten. Thank you very much. 10 minutes from now.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pause the recording.
I apologize. So I apologize for that. That is, since the recording just came on, I apologize for causing the sound to go off by not leaving that up to my 3 colleagues who are in charge of that. Secondly, though, I want to really emphasize something, and that is this. It's one thing to disagree with what a person has said or done, and it's another thing to condemn his or her person or character or genuineness. And I want to be clear about my relationship to Elder Wilson on both fronts. Namely, I am disappointed in what he has sometimes said and done, and he knows that. He has heard me, or reports of me in both recordings, saying that, and I, for one moment, don't want to retrieve or retract any of that. On the other hand, I also want to say with the same emphasis that I consider him to be a man of integrity and honesty. And I think that's the tragic nature of the situation. That is, he is genuinely persuaded that he is doing God's will. And I have to respect that. And I also respect the fact that he is who he is day in and day out, year after year. We don't find one Elder Wilson saying this sometime and another Elder Wilson saying that. He's a very straightforward, candid man, and I appreciate that constancy and that commitment to his own views, even though they're not my views. I think it's clear that good people can make bad mistakes and bad people can make good decisions. So deciding and being are two very different things. Okay, over to you, Forrest.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your comments. And Ruth, I'm going to go with you. You're ready to go.
Yes, I want to say how much I appreciated Carson's presentation. It was absolutely delightful for me. And so I've been fortunate to be a member of a church that's similar to the Danish church, because I've also have a lot of Danish with me as far as that's concerned. So I just really want to say thank you very much, because I thought he's, even in his statement at the end where he accepted the compassion that he needs to have for the president of our church. And I feel the same way there too. I am grateful for his coming and for his being invited to come. And I think that we all can be grateful for his presence.
Thank you.
Carsten, you want to respond to that, or?
Yeah, am I live? Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Ruth. And David, also thank for your summary comments. And yes, it is both at an emotional level and it's at an intellectual level. And I might mention that one thing that has made a big difference in my life was an article that Smuts van Rooyen wrote many years ago in Spectrum about his growing up in a family where there was a codependency to his alcoholic father. And it dawned on him that he had a similar sick relationship, a sick codependency to the church. And I think that many of us who frequent these Sabbath schools and forum are, in some respect, Adventist anonymous. We're recovering Adventist. We're trying to get out of that codependency. That article meant a lot for me because I realized that the church should not get in the way of my religious relationship with God and my spiritual experience. And I think in what I've written here, I sort of draw the line in the sand even more clearly. And I feel a great relief of that. I've publicly come and said, I disagree, but I still want to be part of the family. But I'm not going to be codependent anymore.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Carsten. And in keeping with our switching back and forth between genders, I'm going to go to Bud. Bud, your comments, questions?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Carsten for his outstanding presentation, identified with his thoughts very much. A couple of sidebars. I wish I could be as gracious as Dave Larson is. A goal to be reached. As Carsten was talking, I thought of a lot about Graham Maxwell. And if there was anyone that could had a right to thumb his nose at the corporate structure, Graham Maxwell could have. One time he said to us in Sabbath school class, I'm staying on the bus that brought me. They can try to take me off the bus, but I will be kicking and holding on to the seat. And I thought that was profound. And the idea that the church did not feel they had a responsibility to post his obituary in the Adventist Review is stunning, is profound from his standpoint of what he contributed to the Adventist encyclopedia and commentaries on the Book of Romans. So I identify with Carsten's comments very much this morning. Another sidebar, I had the privilege of teaching Carsten Thomsen physiology when he was an 8th grader at Battle Creek Academy. And keep in mind, Carsten, I was only 20 years old. And so you should have a lot of room and latitude for forgiveness for that as well. Anyway, God bless you, Carsten. And what an outstanding article, and I just admire you greatly. Thank you.
Thank you, Bud. Memories of Battle Creek. And I think that was back in the days where sexual education started maybe in the 8th or 9th grade. In the 7th grade, a teacher asked us to illustrate the 10 Commandments by finding pictures that illustrated them. And I walked up to the teacher and said, "What is adultery?" And she said to me, "Well, it's thinking or doing impure thoughts." So I went home with a collection of National Geographic in the basement and tried to find a picture of thinking and doing impure thoughts. And there was a picture of people sitting at a card table that was floating in the Dead Sea. And they were sitting in the salty water, they're playing cards. And I put that in the 7th Commandment in terms of committing adultery. I think they must have roared with laughter.
Carsten, do you think Bud could change some of those grades? That
I think he was pretty gracious. I have positive memories of Bud.
okay, all right, good enough. Thank you. Okay, I now want to go to Anastasia. Anastasia, unmute yourself and there you go. You're unmuted.
Okay, thank you. I feel proud of that. I can unmute myself. Thank you very much. Good morning, Forrest. Dr.
morning.
Larson, I appreciate so very much your comments, and I got kind of emotional because before I met Dr. Branson, it had been close to 40 years I had not set foot on anything Adventist, although I did take with me all those wonderful things and experiences. And it was not because of people. Even when I worked for 2 years as a teacher, my principals, my parents, everybody, great recommendations. It was not even because of policy, because I was getting paid half of what a male teacher with less responsibilities and less education was getting paid. And someone else, not myself, sued the educational department, and 10 years later I got, so it was not because of that. I left because in few words, I could not be myself. I could not use the gifts and talents that God has given me, and thank him for all these years now, over 40 years, allowing me to use them in Protestant, Catholic, and so on, other schools. And not that I was saying anything controversial. I had to really muzzle myself about not anything controversial, but the policies. I didn't want to endanger my pastors, my teachers, and everybody else. So the question is it the individual? Can one, at least for me, was not if I had the choice to live or not to do, but could I develop my God-given talents that God and gifts gave me in a place that I was forbidden to do so, really? And now my question, so things have changed a lot to the better. Classes like you, like Mr. Walters, and I said, since I met Dr. Branson, and even then the people, all their friends and everything I've kept, but it was extremely painful for that. I also want to say, I'm sorry I'm taking too much time. When I was for first time, I met Adventist really at Newbold. They were so amazing. They celebrated. I was the only Greek, at least the first year, and the only non-Adventist. And they celebrated the fact of my knowledge of the Greek, of being Greek. And I studied and learned so much. And on overseas time, how we can really about diversity integrated, something that I came with such huge hopes when I came to America. On overseas night, Dr. Scoyle was the head of the classics there and biblical studies. And he got for us, I was the only Greek, Steve Agenson was an Adventist from America. We made him a Zorba, Yugoslavian and Italian girls. And we were, because dancing, the folk dancing of Greece is part of our Greek heritage and the Balkans, really. And I was missing it so much. In the beginning, they would say, no, no, no. And this Dr. Scoyle, is a saint for me, got permission at Newbold College to present Zorba the Greek and dance. And so I came with great hopes about that. And that was not the culture in America, at least when I came. Okay, so the question for me is not probably many people that has no elasticity. I felt, and during the years I still feel, with the exception of a couple classes, that I wouldn't be able to give my gifts. I was able to do it in a Catholic university, in a Lutheran university, even in a Baptist university. You've heard of Eastern University. Last year we were in Pennsylvania. They have established, and my son, there is a tenured professor, Greek Orthodox, they have established the St. Basil Orthodox Institute there in a Baptist university. And I was allowed to teach Greek literature and Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodoxy. My Eastern Orthodox Church has allowed me and celebrates the fact that I keep the Sabbath and celebrate the Lord's resurrection on Sunday. So those stagnated churches, at least my experience can be, so many of them are allowing you those things that are in principles with Christ and Christ's life, and they don't get threatened. You're clear with them and you tell them, you know what the perimeters are. So I was able, I feel, in God's spirit to blossom. I do not see this kind, I still see a lot of flexibility. The fact that what we are doing today, for me, it's a miracle considering what was happening some years ago. And thank you, Dr. Carsten. I'm sorry I'm taking too much, but I still feel I cannot use those other things. I don't know if I can, I can't, I'm not going to ask, but I felt, at least when we were Eastern, that all these universities knowing I will go and even with a very strict Lutheran university in Irvine, and I will stop, I'm sorry. My question quickly is this: in the Orthodox Church, Greek Orthodox Church, there is a patriarch, but there are autocephalous churches where the laity can vote in many, many levels. Is there such a thing in the Adventist Church? And thank you and welcome, Carsten. I knew your wife, and we had the best Christmas of 1965 in Denmark. Thank you so much. And thank you. And I apologize for having taken so long. Thank you.
You're muted, Carsten. Did you want to respond?
I just thank you. And I'm sort of trying to figure out, you said you knew my wife back from 1965. That's long before I learned to know her.
Yeah,
so,
through Birta. I met Birta at Newbold and we had Christmas at your wife's
okay.
home. Yes.
Okay.
And we've been friends ever since. And I also
okay. That now I know who you are because I recognize the name Anastasia. I didn't know you were Alexander as the last name.
Thank
so
you. Yes.
Now the dots are connected. Thank you.
Anastasia is my first. Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
So
First, could I jump in right here real quickly? Go ahead, Anastasia.
The question was, is there not a Cephalus Adventist church where laity votes and stuff like we do have in the Eastern Orthodox, in the Greek Orthodox churches? We have a patriarch, but we have also churches like Church of America, the Orthodox Church, Greek Orthodox Church of America, it's autocephalous. Is there such a thing for Adventist church?
Forrest, I'd like to jump in here if you got a minute or not.
Well, I want to answer her question, if you don't mind, Bud. And that is, yes, we do in the Adventist Church at our constituency meetings. Those are attended by lay people just as much as any clergy, and it goes up. And there's lay people on all the committees. And I don't think there is at the division level, but there's a lot of lay involvement. And I know in the Southeastern California Conference, there's a lot of particularity that lay people are properly represented on all the committees. So I respond to that. But I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you.
Want to
There were a couple of things I forgot to mention. One was Maxwell said I'm using my own words. I'm paraphrasing. He said he finally wised up when people would ask him if he were an Adventist. He would say, you tell me what an Adventist is, and I'll tell you whether or not I am one. I think that's rather profound. The idea that there needs to be, and I think Carsten references this to a degree, more of an inclusivity with regards to people in the church, and Maxwell pointed that out. The other is these Zoom sessions, to me, remind me of those thrilling days of yesteryear when the early Christians met in homes and discussed theology and biblical truths. And the Zoom sessions to me are just extremely outstanding from that standpoint. It would be pretty hard personally for me to go back to the church and sit in a pew after having experienced this wonderful Zoom session led by David Larson, just outstanding. Those are my two comments.
Okay, thank you, Bud. Thank you. I'm now going to go to Simona. Simona?
Thank you. So first of all, Carsten, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. As you were talking and as I was listening to these comments, I remembered something that happened long ago when I was in high school. So I was in Seventh-day Adventist school, and in the dining room, there was something that we call the senior table. And it was an unofficial name in the that was part of what we often see, the book of unwritten rules, that only certain people could sit there. And they enforced it quite stringently. So one day, I was a second year at the time, I came into the dining room with my lunch, and there was no other place to sit except there. And so I went and I sat there, and you could hear a pin drop in the entire dining room. And people started talking again, and I kind of looked at my plates and stuff, and I realized I need something else. And so I got up. I went back to take a piece of cutlery or something. I came back and my lunch was gone. One of the people who were sitting there took my entire lunch and they put it in the dirty dishes. And that was it. You couldn't go and get another one. And if not for that particular thing, I probably never would have tried sitting at that table again. But because they did that, I went, and every single time, even if I had to wait, I waited until the place opened and I sat at that table day after day and meal after meal. And pretty soon the table got open for everybody. Sometimes we have to make a stand, because at this table of our church, of our world, everybody has the right to sit at it. We all have the right to sit at the table. And no one has the right to tell us that we do not belong. So this sense of belonging that we all as humans need, and I think is one of the top needs of human beings, to belong somewhere. I often think of that, and I think of Jesus as a great example of courage to be who he was and to never allow other people, particularly those who were in high positions at his time, to tell him that he didn't belong. So my message to all of you is, you are the one who defines where you belong, and you need to take that seat at the table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carsten. Did you want to piggyback
Fantastic,
on that?
fantastic. I so much agree with you. And the problem is, to what extent should one make the stand? And it's a tricky thing. And I think what you did there is a fantastic illustration of courage to do that. I'm probably not representative of many of you, because I live in a country where we are much more open, and the church is much more liberal, if I dare use a tainted word as such. So I don't feel those same things in the same way. The type of discussions we have in Adventist today, Sabbath schools, or Roy Branson Sabbath school, we have in our Sabbath school class in the physical church. There are no subjects that are taboo, which is a wonderful thing. So I'm blessed in terms of that.
If I could just add something,
Please, go ahead.
years ago, I was in a really difficult situation at church. I felt like, where I grew up was extremely conservative. And when I said extremely, some of the things that the lifestyle and the values were probably very much different from what you consider conservative. But there was a time when for weeks I didn't go to church, and my sister, who left church long before that day, came one day and looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I just don't feel that I belong there anymore." And she said, "You belong there. It's just the others who have the problem with that." And I often thought about that, it's not always easy to take that seat at the table, but it's worth it, because, and I had to redefine my belonging to church as belonging to God, not necessarily to the physical place, not necessarily to the people who didn't like the way I spoke or the way I thought, but as a place where I'm going to worship the God to whom I belong. Thank you.
Thank you. If David, I interrupted you. You wanted to say something and I cut you off. Did you want to?
Very quickly, I wanted to underline something that Anastasia said, because it brings into focus something that's very, very important. That is, one of the reasons to become less active in the Adventist community is that there simply isn't enough room in the Adventist community for one's full talents to blossom. Now, that's something we need to say more often and more understandably. I think of the conductor, Herbert Bloomstead. I understand that he's now 94 years old. What if he had spent his life teaching music on one of our campuses? It simply would not have allowed his talents to flourish. So Anastasia was telling us where she taught and in circumstances she taught that would not have been possible in an Adventist setting, not because there's something wrong with the Adventist church, but it is very limited, very focused, and the range of talents it can take good use of is quite circumspect. So we need to recognize that as a reason for people being affiliated with the church in some other way. Dr. Bloomstead has not left the Adventist church, but he is being an Adventist in the way that is appropriate for him and in the places that are appropriate for him, given the talents that he has. And it's really, really important for us all to develop whatever talents we have. That's it. Thank you, Forrest.
Very good. Thank you very much. Before I go to Dana, I'd like to jump in here, Carsten. I'm very impressed with your presentation. I do have a couple questions. They're more rhetorical, but you were talking about Adventism in the 19th century, challenging mainstream churches. Do you think Adventism was the only group during the Second Enlightenment? And not Enlightenment. The
Awakening.
Second, thank you. Second Awakening in the 19th century. I mean, we had the Stone Campbellites and we had Christian Science. Anyway, do you think the Adventism was the only one that was challenging? And then I have another question, just kind of piggyback on that.
Yeah, I mean, I have met many wonderful people, some who are religious, some who are not, some who are Buddhists, some who are atheists. And I think God has put good things in all people if we're created in his image. The thing that I least appreciate about Adventism is our exclusivism that we are the chosen ones. It is an arrogance that does not meet other people where they are. It doesn't listen. It doesn't have empathy. It does do many good things for many people. It has through the years. It also hurt a lot of people. But there's a lot more room in heaven than we think. The little old story I remember is that at the gates of the pearly gates, Peter is standing outside and making everybody that they come to the pearly gates, that they have their credentials in order and he can let them in. And then Paul stands inside the New Jerusalem behind the pearly gates and does an extra check. And at the end of the day, they count how many people they have let in through the pearly gates. And Peter says, yeah, I let 1,000 people in today that all had their papers in order. And Paul said, that's funny. When I counted everybody that I saw came in, there's 1,500. It's probably him, Jesus again, who's sneaking them in through the back door.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna I'll save my next question if we have time. Dana, I'm coming to you. And then I've got you on the list, Peter.
Oh, thank you. I don't even know what to say first. I have so many things to say. Thank you, Dr. Thomsen, for such a beautiful and heartfelt presentation. Thank you for opening your heart and your mind to us and talking about your personal experience. It was absolutely a gift. And thank you, Simona. You brought back some memories, some bittersweet memories. When I was little, when we would come home from church Sabbath, we would eat together with some families, and women were always in the kitchen preparing the meal, and men were always in the dining room talking theology. And I found myself, even as a little child, sitting with my dad and listening. And when I became a teenager, I was told that I shouldn't be there because it looks like I like men, not that I like the conversation. Anyway, I ended up being a chaplain and a PhD, so maybe I liked the conversation as well. I don't know. I think about Anastasia, if I can pronounce your name this way. And I was teaching for 3 universities back in Romania. I was teaching for the State University Social Work and Sociology Department. I was teaching for the Theology Department in the Orthodox Church, Baptist Church, and Seventh-day Adventist Church. And believe me, it was easier to teach the Baptist Church and the Orthodox Church. I had more challenges in my own church. Coming back to what Dr. Thomsen said, I found myself in a very, interesting situation as a chaplain student that was doing an internship in Loma Linda Hospital. I had to baptize the baby. And besides my internal conflict regarding baptized children, which I was always taught that is a sin, and nobody told me during my school that is not a sin, and nobody taught me how to baptize the baby. So there I was, everybody got mad with me. The nurses got mad with me because I didn't know how to do it. The supervisor got mad with me, and so on. And even my mom got mad with me when she found out that I might be in a position to baptize the child. So I have many relatives back in Romania. My mom is 83 years old. We had many conversations. Her faith grew as my faith grew. But there are still things that are taboo that I cannot talk with her. And there is a rift. I feel like I'm stretched between what I believe and where I'm coming from and how I have to behave or how I have to hide not to break other people's faith. So thank you, Carsten, for recognizing this tension. And in a way, it's what Jesus was. Jesus was like a bridge stretching between who God really is and our limited understanding of God. And maybe this is what we are called to do as Roy Branson Sabbath School. And thank you I cannot express how much I thank you for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think one thing that it has dawned on me, maybe much too late, is to be true to oneself. And I've had situations where my children have chosen to not be part of the church. And I've learned to say, I'm glad you're following your own conscience and doing what you really believe, that you don't play a hypocrisy game of saying something that you don't believe. Congratulations for doing that. That honesty is, I think, extremely important for all of us, also all of us who are in the tension between these forces that you mentioned.
Yeah, if I can just say a word, we have our own challenges with women's ordination in the church. And obviously I'm not ordained, but in terms of affirmation, I got more affirmation from my Catholic patients than I got from my pastors.
Okay, thank you. By the way, Dana, I hope you didn't try to baptize that baby by immersion, because that's not the right way to do that. So anyway, I want to come now to Peter. Peter?
Thank you, Carsten, for your presentation, for sharing with us your travel, as you call it, from darkness to light. And it's an interesting lesson, experience for each one of us, because I think at least periodically we have to examine ourselves what really we believe in. And if we're believing in it's right or wrong. And I believe that your experience, it's and with the 10 points that you found good in Adventist, it was a revelation, a gentle revelation of the Spirit of God, which is working when we are truly and sincerely looking for truth. And all of us, all of these points, I think they are a very good example for each one of us. Also, I'd like to add that despite the fact that you disagree with some things, it's normal in our experience, human experience, because there is no human institution that is perfect. Only God is perfect. And of course, we have to cope with that. But despite the fact that there is no perfection, we still found some good things that we can follow in our life. Now I have a question, if it's possible for you to answer. You mentioned in the article and your presentation that listening to the president of the General Conference, his sermon, that there are some things that you found that you disagree with. Can you mention a few of them?
Well, it's basically just about everything that he said. He had 14 items where the church was under attack. And he specifically mentioned that people do no longer believe that the earth was created in 6,000 years ago, that people are attacking the belief of creation in 7 literal days and so on. And on it goes. That people are accepting liberal lifestyles, that people are accepting alternate sexualities instead of just the straight sexuality of heterosexuality, and on and on. The viewpoint of women and so on. The list was very, very long, and all of these points were points that he felt were very unique identifiers of the Adventist church. And I agree with him that if you look at it from a branding standpoint, the Adventist church has been very good at branding itself, having some very unique beliefs. And that does sell tickets in certain places and for certain types of personalities. I don't argue with that. But I consider a lot of those branding things to be perhaps intentioned to be good things, but many of them, in my optics, are cunningly devised fables. Sorry to say it that harshly. And, this business of writing down what I believe, as you mentioned, I once heard somebody, there was a lady who every 10 years, she took a piece of paper and wrote down what she believed, and filed it, and then came back 10 years later, and then she had a whole history of how her truth or perception of truth evolved over time. I think it's a very healthy thing, and I've started doing that also. So when I turn 80, I'll do a new one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me ask my second question, Carsten. It's really not so much questions, dialogue. I struggle with some of the same issues that you do in regards to the organization. And yet at the other side of it, I've worked for the organization and I've seen the value in it. And specifically in regards to this women's ordination, whereas, our union here has been censured. You said your union was censured. We've just got to the point and say, hey, well, okay, back there in Silver Spring, fine. You don't believe it, that's fine. But do you think there's got to be some nuance in between kind of what we have and what might be healthy for all of us?
I mean, I think you hit a very important word there, because mental health in terms of our relationship to each other and in terms of relationship to our church is paramount. If our relationship is not a healthy relationship, we need to do something about it. And yes, in an environment where things are evolving and changing and so on, there has to be some give and take. I absolutely agree with that. In women's ordination, we chose in Denmark and in between, all the male pastors in Denmark said that we refuse to be ordained. So no new pastors have been ordained in Denmark the past 3 years. And they also refused to have a differentiated pay scale for ordained and non-ordained. And that was the men who supported that. So now women are paid the same, whether they're ordained or not, as the men. So that's a little nudge to the organization that you can deal with it creatively.
Yeah, we did that here in Southeastern. All the males had licensed ministers, not the ordained status, since we all carried a license. And then finally we started ordaining. But I think it's just the point is we've decided to move on.
Right. And I think that's a healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
And probably, I mean, talking about Ted Wilson, I also have seen him be very gracious, and he seems that way, but he can also be brutal the way that he does not recognize the female president of the Southeastern California Conference, and I have understood that on a platform once he walked by her without even greeting her.
It was rude, and I was just going to say,
and that's where I say you can come with all the flowery words, and yes, I make tons of mistakes also, but to publicly do that type of thing that sets an example, that's, oh my God, it's so terrible.
Well, I just want to say one thing before I go to Eduardo. I was at our last Pacific Union constituency meeting, and whereas our president here in Southeastern is now the executive secretary for the Pacific Union, the point is, this issue didn't even come up again. It's just old news now. We've got to go on. We're in 2021, 2022. So anyway, that's where we.
I think moving on, you cannot let that codependency of the church destroy your life.
Yeah, I like that analogy. I like that analogy. I'm going to go now to Eduardo.
Carson, putting Ted Wilson aside, you think that he is expressing his own ideas or the ideas of the church? And let me make another comment. For 7 years, I attend the annual council as a visitor. And one day I saw Sandy. So I walked to her and say hi, hello. And she exploded and said to me, "I'm tired of you. I'm sick of you." And I say, "Sandy, we just talked once at your office. How come you are sick of me?" "Well, I'm walking to the meetings, and if you want to talk, let's talk walking." So if you talk about brutal attitude, we need to see both sides. But let me go back to my question. You think that
before you go on, Eduardo, I just want to say I've never seen that approach by Elder Roberts at all. I don't know what was happening, but I want to defend her right now. I've never seen her in a very rude posture at all. So what happened, I don't know.
I don't think anybody needs to defend her. It's normal that when you've been under pressure as long as you have been in that situation she's in, that the pot boils over. That's human. It would be strange if it didn't occur. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah. Well, I understand that, but I just say she's a very kindly person. So, all right, Eduardo, I'll go back to you now.
With all due respect, did you call her Sandy? Because that alone would, her reaction would be justifiable if you called her Sandy.
Well,
you wouldn't call Ted Wilson Teddy.
Yeah.
Did you call her Sandy because she's a woman? She has the position in her, a person in her position should be called Elder Roberts or Dr. Roberts.
I agree.
Okay. All right. I've got to let's keep this back on. So I'm going to go let Eduardo, if you want to finish up, but no more derogatory remarks. Okay, I'm going to move on then to, I guess, let's see, I think I've got Ruth up there again. Ruth? You're muted, Ruth.
Thank you. There are a lot of good people in lots of places who sometimes make very big mistakes. And I think that's important that we recognize that. I spent a lot of time, I spent a series of times at the General Conference Executive Committee. I was a member of that committee. I was also a committee on a number of other committees that puts you on too. And I've also been involved in local committees on a number of occasions. There are people who will be unpleasant. They will be that way all the time. But there will be hundreds of people also who will be very loving. When I was with the General Conference Committee, I saw some of the most wonderful people that I could have imagined, and I was respected and given a great deal of respect at all times. And I saw other people that were treated poorly some of the time. We have to somehow be compassionate to those who are sometimes being unkind too. And we can help them to be kinder if we can be kind to them and find good ways to help them. Sometimes, but sometimes we can't. I've run into that too in my own experiences. So I'm very appreciative of what has been said by so many of you folks here in both compassionate and understanding. And thank you for that.
Okay, thank you again. And Carsten, did you want to respond to that? And then I'm going to turn it over to David because we're almost to 12:30 now.
Right. I mean, we have to bear over with each other's shortcomings, and to be able to talk honestly about them with each other, I think is a sign of strength. So I think that's a wonderful thing to do that. So, and then there's this issue of how we address people. It varies a lot in what culture you're in. In Denmark, we never use the word pastor this or pastor that or elder this or elder that. And I was talking with Lauren Siebold also, where there's a lot of tradition in the US that when you introduce somebody, if he has or he or she has a doctor's degree, then you call them doctor this and doctor that. And we don't do that in Denmark. We don't make a difference with people in terms of what education they have. So I appreciate you trying to flatter me by calling me doctor, but I only have a bachelor's degree from Andrews University.
Okay, thank you very much, Bachelor Thomsen. So anyway, I am going to go to David, and you can conclude our discussion for the day.
David, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Simona.
I haven't heard a thing you said.
Okay, I'd like to, I was saying, I wish we had more time, but if you want to say more, stay by for the after session, because that's likely to continue for quite a while longer. One human interest thing, I think, while you folk were discussing, I turned to the internet to see if I could find Elder Wilson's 14 points. And it is possible to find his sermon with its 14 points on the internet in both written and spoken word. But it'll be a little interesting because President Woodrow Wilson also gave a speech with 14 points. So one will have to separate those two Wilsons. Woodrow Wilson and Penn Wilson both gave presentations that had 14 points. I didn't realize that till just now when I was looking for Elder Wilson's 14. So stay by if you would like to speak more, and the rest of us will have to move on. We'll turn off the recording so that you can speak without the whole world hearing you. But thank you to those of you who are able and willing to speak up on the recording, because it really adds a lot to the conversation. And again, thank you, Carsten, very much for your leadership.
Thank you, Carsten. Yes.
The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Okay, I am now stopping the recording. Oops. Stopping the recording.